You are listening to the Nightly News Podcast, the voice of the Knights.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm so honored to be joined by Associate Professor of Communication, Professor Michael Lear-Olimpi, talking about the upcoming CPC Film Series, where he is going to present the classic Western High Noon. Professor Olimpi, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
You know, it's been some time since I've had you on, and I remember the last couple of times we had you on, we were talking about communication ethics. We've had you on several times to talk about some of the things that you've been doing here on campus as well, so it's always a pleasure to have you back, and it's great to have you presenting again for the CPC Film Series.
Yeah, I'm pleased to do it.
Well, another thing that I wanted to talk about was we're also being joined by CPC Film Series correspondent Nick Hogan. Nick, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast as well.
Always happy to be here.
Reviewer extraordinaire.
Nick does such a wonderful job with the CPC Film Series. So, and Nick is in his last term before graduation. So we are going to have a chance to talk to Nick a little bit about his experiences. But just starting off at the top, Nick, this is something that you've been working on for several years now. This was one of the things that very early on you gravitated to. And I'm just curious if you would just share what it was about the film series that got you so interested in this to the point where you've stepped up and filled some pretty big shoes.
Yeah, so my first term, we had a film series, and I did not have any of the professors and stuff that I would know now yet. At first, I just thought it was a random movie night that the school did just for a one-and-done thing. By the next term, I found out it was like an annual thing. And
Annual?
Not annual.
Quarterly.
Quarterly. I meant like it's a regular thing. Our old film series correspondent, Dylan, used to do the film series stories. And after he was finishing up his time at Central Penn, which is already like 2 years ago now, which is insane to think about, I was asked to do the position. And at first I was kind of reluctant because I didn't really know how to write, not necessarily film reviews, but I mean, that is a part of it, but also just reviewing events and stuff in general. I didn't really get how to do it, but getting to do it, especially because the first film series I did was one that Dylan hosted, it felt kind of like a passing a torch moment, and it was very interesting to just see what goes into it, you know, interviewing the person about the film, what the film means to them, looking into the history of the film and getting to write about that on paper, which is very interesting.
And even the last few terms, you've also joined us on the podcast, which
Yep.
has been wonderful, and hearing your insights. Well, Nick, we hope that you feel free to jump in anytime in the line of questioning for
You got
Professor
it.
Olimpi. One more time, it is High Noon with Professor Olimpi. Doors will open at 6 p.m. on Friday, May 9th in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Again, Professor Olimpi, thank you for joining us. First of all, let's talk about the film itself. This is, I don't want to say the oldest, because there were some older films that we watched in the film series over the years.
Sure.
But what was it about this particular film that made you really gravitate to choosing this one? Because when you sent me the list of films that you were considering, I was taken aback slightly about your choices, because I didn't know you were a fan of old Westerns. But tell me why High Noon was the one that you went with.
No, I'm a fan of all Westerns, good Westerns and bad Westerns. But I chose High Noon because, first of all, I love it. Not that I want to impose my proclivities and favorites on an audience.
Well,
but
that's
it's
the
also,
whole point of this
well,
thing.
it's
Yeah,
part of it, but
to
I
show
like to
stuff you
share.
like.
I like there to be some relevance to the audience that's coming. I chose it. It's from 1952, directed by Fred Zinnemann. And I chose it because it's a classic. You know, that term is overused, but it is a classic in the genre. It depicts characters who are pitted in really, really tough places. You know, it's a moral dilemma movie, really. Will Kane, who is the marshal, played by Gary Cooper, who won his second Best Actor Oscar in this. He had won one 10 years earlier. But there's a lot of tension. It's basically a story of moral integrity and courage. I think that there are parallels between what we see going on in the country now, culturally and politically, to the movie, as there were when Zinnemann made it in 1952 with the rise of the Cold War, really the height of it, you could say, the early Cold War, and Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin's anti-communist Red Scare tactics. You know, it was pretty obvious back then, and I think audiences can relate to the current political situation in the country when they see Will Kane and his dilemma. You know, he has to take care of a gang that's coming into Hadleyville, the town in the movie, and nobody will back him up. It's just him. So he's got the courage to stand up And I just like it. I like that self-reliant, ethically strong character. It's a big factor for me.
Would you say, and obviously, we're not necessarily going to get into this on the podcast today, but would you say that in your presentation, without giving too much away, because we always like to have some type of mystery going on, would you say that that's one of the main theses that you're going to have on this, is kind of making that comparison from then to now?
I will make a connection. I'll make a parallel. I'll state it.
So you have done this before. Tell us a little bit about the first time that you presented the film series, why you chose that movie, and then flash forward again to your selection process of the films that you've selected for your 2 times with the film series.
Sure. My first film series presentation was, I believe it was January of 2019.
I don't know how you can remember that.
Well, there are some reasons I remember, but I won't go into those. Yeah, it was January 2019. The series at that point was a year old, and somebody had already done Jaws, so I couldn't do that one. But I chose Network, and the reason I chose the movie, 1975-76, Rocky won the best picture over Network, but let's not get into that discussion. I chose Network because it's by one of my favorite directors, Sidney Lumet, and also screenwriters, Paddy Chayefsky. And I like the people who were in it, but I'd seen it many times, and I love it. Again, I'm a media ethicist, and Network, although it's a farce, it's a parody, which I didn't realize when I first saw it in college. But okay, it dawned on me later. I enjoy the issues that are hashed out in there, the journalistic ethics, the business ethics. Also, it's kind of a teleplay. It's high language, high performance. You got Bill Holden and Peter Finch, who posthumously won the Oscar for the film, and Faye Dunaway, a lot of big figures. And I picked that movie because I wanted to show how, depicted in film, we see media taken to task, particularly by Paddy Chayefsky, who, as a screenwriter, he had worked in television, he had worked in films. He was very critical. He was very sarcastic toward the industry itself and the choices it made and the missions it pursued. So that's what got me to pick Network. Again, though, combination of personal preference, but salience to the audience on the topic.
I'm sure if you had a redux of that presentation, you could probably make some parallels to our current situation politically as well.
I could. There are some in there, yes. They're not as obvious as in High Noon, but yeah, there are some.
So what you're getting at is that in 1952, that the undertone of this movie was directly related to the Red Scare, or after this movie was put out, these parallels were made. Was that the intention of this film to, critique the Red Scare at the time?
I think that I've read some analysis that was in part Zinnemann's intent. Yeah. To do that, along with other people involved in the film, making a response to that. Of course, the story was on hand, but they selected it for that, and I think that the parallels they're pretty clear.
I think that's really interesting, especially because when you're putting into a historical perspective for a film nearly 75 years old at this point, I think that that's a really interesting component to look at how a film like this can actually teleport us, in a sense, back to that time.
Yeah, I actually had a kind of like an extension question to that. I know before we started recording, you were talking about how it's a Western and also sort of a film noir film. When I think of film noir films, I think, post World War II, lower budget films, it's even for the time, and the reason they did that was so they could keep that same few settings, and it was cheaply made, but people enjoyed them a lot. And they were still well-made films. Can you go a little into more of how it could be classified as that genre as well as a Western?
I see a little bit as film noir because of the way it is depicted. First of all, it's very dark, as you can probably figure out from my brief description of the movie. And it's shot in a film noir aesthetic. I mean, it's stark.
Harsh black and whites.
Yeah, it's high contrast black and white. It's a black and white movie. There are some techniques that are used, some still standout techniques in montage, memory, back scene. And it's gloomy. It's gloomy.
Okay.
And it does have that aspect of not only man versus man, but nature versus man, with the environment going on. The frontier town. Plus, Zinnemann did some film noir. His 1949 movie, An Act of Violence, is about film noir. It's kind of a stolen valor, lying thing. Van Heflin was the star. Not a Western, but yeah, so there was a little bit of mixture. But I've always sensed that film noir aspect to High Noon. It looks like it, and so that's why I think it's a little bit of that. It's also a little bit of, it's not science fiction. It's fiction, but it's not science fiction. But the reason I mention that is because film noir is an outstanding example of how in the 1950s, Westerns started focusing more on integrity and high issues and the trailblazer pioneer as a hero. And often we see movies in which marshals and sheriffs are anti-heroes in a way. I guess you could make an argument to some extent that you see that here, but Will Kane is truly a hero. He's a man who stands up for himself and his community.
I think what's really interesting, too, when you're talking about how the director here and even some modern directors, how we look. Now, a lot of very well-known directors often stick within the same genre, whereas to me, some of the ones who really stand out, especially I think of Quentin Tarantino as well, the number of genres that he has dabbled within or hybridized, I think that that's really unique. And I think that that goes to show how genre can evolve over time. You know, one of the things that I ask you, and anyone who listens to the program knows I'm a huge fan of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, these episodes and these series have been really talked about in modern media as being new age Westerns. Can you? I know that this isn't necessarily, shows that you're head over heels over like myself, but how has that genre of Western evolved? Because often when we think about when we think about Westerns, we think of the classic Western, much like High Noon, but there are still Westerns being made today.
Sure. They have evolved and they've changed focus also. The content. The early Westerns had their heyday in the late 40s and in the 50s. And as I was saying before, they tended to focus on a wide variety of topics. That's why I mentioned science fiction. Science fiction is fiction that deals with all types of fiction. And again, you can have, cowboys and aliens or whatever that movie was that Harrison Ford and James Bond were in. You can't have that mixture. But Daniel Craig. Sorry, Dan, if you're listening. Maybe he's Sir Daniel. I don't know. But so they had their height then, really, in the late 40s, going through the 50s, pretty much the late 50s. And in those years, they had a really wide variety, but they dealt with sensitivity of characters, although sometimes that's not obvious. But you can find many examples of Westerns where, High Noon's one of them, and there's others where there's a focus on the sensitivity to whatever the issue may be. It could be person to person, and it often involves a woman, of course, the damsel in distress, who the cowboy frontiersman is rescuing. There's some of that, too, in negotiations with Native Americans and the Union Army, although Native Americans are given very short shrift in Westerns until the late 60s and into the 1970s. So you have that and the individualistic spirit. In the 50s, they became a little more psychologically, like say the early 50s to the mid-50s, they became a little more focused on the psychology of these characters, which we saw an expansion of in the 60s. So there has been a steady evolution of Westerns and their topics and how those topics are treated. By the 70s, audiences were pretty well burned out on Westerns, and they started to take different turns. The greatest example of that I can think of is The Shootist, John Wayne's last movie. It focused almost exclusively on him and his end stage as a gunfighter. He doesn't really want to fight, but again, we see this theme in Westerns through their history. Somebody's coming to gun for the Top Gun. They want to be the Top Gun.
Sounds almost exactly like Breaking Bad, honestly.
Well, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yes, but there's the similarities. It reminds me of the line from one of my favorite Westerns. You can criticize me as you want, but the outlaw Josie Wales, when Josie Wales, played by Clint Eastwood, he's looking for the people who've killed his family, and a young gun comes looking for him, and he says he wants to fight him, and Josie Wales says, "Diane ain't much of a living boy," and then he doesn't. But that's pretty much the evolution we've seen. In the 80s, through now, we now see all kinds of off takes on the Western. They're much more specific. The genre has fragmented because there are so many other interests that can be explored, and old material the directors don't want to keep going over the same thing anymore.
So would you say, I think the thing with me is with, let's say, the shows I'm referencing, what about it makes them a Western apart from setting? I mean, I suppose you could make some connections with some storylines, and that, I'm just trying to kind of put together what a modern Western looks like that's sort of set in today's day and age, as opposed to looking back in the the early days of westward expansion.
The only thing I can really think of, I know you were talking about Breaking Bad earlier, and kind of the fact that you can make it so the protagonist is not a good person, or they're not exactly a likable person, even if they are the hero of the story.
Well, and I would argue that's often a look at film noir as well. I mean, with the anti-hero as well. So I wonder if we're looking at Western and film noir sort of fusing over the time in terms of how some of these screenwriters develop what a modern day Western looks like. Would you agree? Or
I would agree, and I would agree with what Nick said. We do see that, and I think the change has in part been generational and technological. When you say what does a Western look like, obviously it's set in the West, but we don't have the same kind of environment and spirit and mission and pursuits that we had back then, and we were closer to that time period. So if we're talking about different genre of video and cinema in general, could be television, could be for the theater, what makes something seem like a Western really is allegorical. I think it depends on the director's perspective and also the audience's.
Nick, these are the types of conversations that have been unearthed, if you will, by the CPC Film Series. Over our last few minutes, I'd really like to have you, and of course, Nick, I just want to point out, you're welcome on this show anytime. I don't want you to think, oh, this will be my last. Hey, listen, anytime you want to come in, you want to keep, doing your thing with the film series, I would 100% welcome that moving forward. My question to you is, you've had the opportunity to be a part of at least a half a dozen or more film series. Not without saying something specifically, but what were some of the fondest memories that you've had from this experience?
Yeah, I want to say I've enjoyed... I really have enjoyed doing every single one. My favorite, I do have a soft spot for the second one I did, which was Dylan again, but he got to host some of his own films that he's made.
Yes.
And as someone who's into filmmaking and just creative stuff in general, it was very fun seeing another student that had very similar hobbies and interests to me get to show his thing to the school and just other people in general. And it was very fascinating getting to watch all the work that went into making those films as well.
And I've had a little bit longer of a past with the film series, but to me, that's one of the more memorable ones. And this is taking nothing away from any of my colleagues or anyone who did this, but having a student who had just recently graduated be able to show us not only a movie that they created themselves, but also another movie that they helped in creating, it was really something special and something that I'll always remember. And we had a packed house that night too, so that's a tough one.
Yeah, I like those ones a lot because it basically it felt very isolatedly. That's not a word, but it felt very specifically special, and the fact that you really couldn't get this anywhere else besides the CPC Film Series.
And I will tell you that I still am in regular contact with Dylan, and it's a very fond memory of his too. I will say that he recently got the film rescored.
Oh, really?
So there is a potential that a future film series will be that again, only with the
new score.
It not only just with the new score, but there was more improvements that were made. So keep something to keep an eye on.
I want to add one point I just thought of, speaking about the political overtones of High Noon. High Noon, when it came out, it really angered John Wayne. Oh. He saw it as an anti-American movie. Some of the reasons he thought that were this, there wasn't this banding together. There was not this community spirit. He didn't see it so much as a frontier movie, as a character play, a moral play, and that was why he got together with Howard Hawks. Howard Hawks. Probably best known for what's he probably best known for? Red River, I guess, is his biggest movie from the late 40s. And they then made, as a response to High Noon, Rio Bravo. So there were people who saw the political tones
Of course.
to High Noon.
Nick, I just have one final question for you before we get out of here today. As you look back on your experience, not only just with the Nightly News, because you're so much more as a part of the Nightly News than just our film series correspondent, what are some of the most fond memories that you're going to have of the film series moving forward and as you reflect back on your college experience?
I think what I'm happy about is that I'm not leaving anything behind, really. I think it's just more so going to evolve even more when I'm not here. I'll still try to be at every film series, at least for the foreseeable future, as a guest at least. So I just think it's very interesting how it's in a different place now than even it was when I started a couple years ago. Not in a bad place. It wasn't in a bad place then. It's just different. And I think that the more that we do new film series and we get new correspondents and stuff to do it, it's just going to be uniquely different and enjoyable.
Well, I'll tell you right now that we have had a who's who of film series correspondents from Leslie Heimbaugh to Dylan to you. So, I mean, the next person's going to have just as big as shoes to fill. So I really look forward to what's on the horizon for the film series. Yep. But, hey, we still have you for one more, and maybe we can convince you to do a second one after that. But
I'm an email away.
Maybe. Also, Dick, I want to thank you, too, as co-advisor of the club and editor of the blog. Your film series reviews and other movie-related articles that you've written are informed. Nothing to take away from our previous critics, as you said, and reviewers, but you have a particularly deep sense not only of film's being, what it means and interpretation, but also the film industry in general.
Yeah.
And you've done a fantastic job. It's always fun to edit your work because I learned something. And we are sadly and greatly going to miss you, as Professor Miller was saying.
Well, we still have a couple of months.
Yeah, a couple of months, but I mean, when eventually. I'm glad you'll be doing the review for High Noon, so I can say that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you being here today. Of course, we're going to mark our calendars for Friday, May 9th, as Professor Olimpi presents the 1952 classic Western High Noon in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Doors open at 6 o'clock, and you can come out and donate for your refreshments to the Nightly News Media Club. We are so happy to be there to be the sponsor of the outing.
Definitely come out. It's free.
All right. Well, Nick, real quick, thank you so much, not only just for being here today, but just everything that you've done as part of the Nightly News over the past 3 years. And I just can't thank you enough for all of your passion and enthusiasm. It's infectious, and it's helped continue the long-standing tradition of our club. So I just want to thank you eternally.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And Professor Olimpi, thank you for stepping up and wanting to do something different and unique with the film series. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation. I'm so looking forward to the night.
Oh, thank you, Professor Miller. I'm glad to do it, and I hope everybody enjoys it and has a good time.
Well, so there you go. Friday, May 9th, CPC Film Series, High Noon with Professor Lear-Olimpi. Mark your calendars, and we will see you there. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. We want to thank CPC Film Series correspondent Nick Hogan and the Associate Professor of Communication, Professor Michael Lear-Olimpi, for joining us today. But we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.
This is Nick Hogan, Secretary of the Nightly News and CPC Film Series correspondent. You're listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. Professor Paul Miller, and I am so honored to be joined by one of the more prolific students that we've ever had on the podcast. That would be news correspondent Noah Lopez. Noah, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I'm back again. Here it is. Here's me.
Yeah, and this is going to be a little bit different than how you're typically on the podcast, because we're actually going to get to interview you about something that you've been working on for an astounding year and a half at this point.
It's quite a long time.
So what we're going to be talking about here today with Noah is the upcoming, it's going to be taking place on Wednesday, June 11th in ATEC 200 from 12 to 1 p.m. It is a presentation called Frames of the Past, Summerdale Campus History Project. This is something Noah has been working on for quite some time. So Noah, what does it feel like to finally have some sort of finality to this project that you've been working on for 18 months now?
Oh, man, when you put it like that, it makes it seem like it's a big, grand presentation. It really is. What I've been doing for the past 18 months is digitizing and trying to preserve the history of our college, because it hasn't been noticed or, treated as much as it should be. I mean, I don't think anyone knew that these photos even existed until right now. And until that presentation, there's going to be a lot of eyes on those photographs and all of those historical documents that we've had over the college. And really, to feel a grand finale to this entire project, it does feel great, because when I was doing it, it felt like there were infinite amount of photos. Like, it was never going to end.
Never ending.
Yeah, it was like, oh, I'm never going to be done with this thing. And now we're nearing the ending of this. We're going to show it to people. And I'm just hoping that I did a good job, really.
So, Noah, I want to just give a little bit of preface to all of what we're going to talk about today,
All right.
and talk a little bit more about where this project came from. And that's sort of where I can, connect some dots, if you will. So, back in 2023, for homecoming weekend, that would have been October 21st, 2023, one of the things that we did was we put together, there is an archive of sorts in the Boyer House of some of the history of mostly Summerdale from some of the early days of our transition down here to the Summerdale campus in 1970. Ish, right? Late 60s, early 70s. And there's a treasure trove of documents, photos, all types of different things. I mean, literally everything. And we can talk about some of the interesting things that you found.
Yeah.
And what I specifically did was I had, we did in collaboration with Dr. Jared Reif and Margaret Shakti and several others back at the time. And I focused on sports. So I was able to find some classic trophies and other sporting items from more modern, but some from back in this time period, 70s and 80s. And I thought that was really cool. And we got such a major excitement from the alumni that were here just to see some of these old documents that we were able to unearth. But what happened after that was where Noah comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
Is that we didn't really know what to do with these items. There was not really a place for them that we could think of immediately. And my concern was that, with many of these photos being 50 plus years old in some circumstances, we really needed to try to save them in some case. And that's when I listed Noah to digitize literally thousands of pictures across all disciplines.
Thousands, yeah, you're right.
So tell me, when you first heard of this idea or project, what were your initial thoughts? I mean, you were still relatively new on campus.
Yes.
I mean, you started here in fall of 23, yes?
I started in October.
So this was but 6 weeks after you've been here. I come to you with this opportunity to do this major project. What was your thought process at that time?
So my first initial reaction was, why is this guy entrusting me with something so huge? I just got here and he already wants me to do and digitize the history of the entire college. So I'm a little confused. I'm also taken aback that you're going to entrust something so huge to a guy who just got here. And
I'm a good judge of character.
Yeah. So I was also, when I first started doing the project, it was a little confusing because at first it was just I thought we were just digitizing communications photos. You gave me like a big brown folder of historical photos from the mass media program mass media. And then when I was done with those, you were like, here's a big box. And I'm like, whoa, what's all this? And actually in the beginning, I was told I was going to be doing it with someone else. I'm doing it on my own, which I had no problem with. When I do my work study, it gives me like a calming time period where I can just work by myself in silence and just digitize photos.
I'm glad that you brought that up because you reminded me of a piece of this project that was really important.
Yes.
Because we had just prior to that, in 23, we did the Nightly News Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And as part of that Hall of Fame, we invited several alumni members from the mass media program. And I had found these pictures.
You found them from that
of
event.
The old radio station,
which look awesome,
and we were able to sort of integrate that. And that's I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that was a key piece to this, was that we over that homecoming weekend in 23, we had our last Hall of Fame celebration, and part of that was inviting several alumni members to campus, and then that led to us finding these photos, which led to this project, and it sort of snowballed from there. So I appreciate you reminding me about that.
Do you want to know what else these photos do make you think about? Like, when I see these things, I don't even believe it was Central Penn. Like, going here right now, and then you see that this campus used to have a giant, almost TV, professional, crazy studio. They used to go on plane trips to different states and countries. They used to have people in bunny rabbit costumes, which I don't want to get into that, but that was a photo I found, someone wearing a rabbit costume.
Maybe it was Easter.
No, it looked pretty terrifying, I'm not going to lie. But they used to have fashion walks, it seemed, from some of the photos. People were walking down, trying on different outfits. I'm like, is this really Central Penn College? Almost.
Well, in fairness, we've always been at the forefront of trying to use innovative curriculum and curriculum that was in demand. And so because of that, over time, our course offerings have evolved. So let's just say this, Noah. What were some of the most interesting things that you noticed while you were going through this cache of photos? Some of the most interesting reflections that you've had in hindsight?
I think that one of the most interesting things is when I was going through the media photos, I saw old printers and how print used to be made. It was like a huge machine, and the paper would go through, and the ink was super, super black. It looked. There was multiple pictures of old printers. They looked like something I've never seen before, and I didn't even know what to call it at first. I thought it was a printer, so I asked good old Professor Michael Lear-Olimpi. Everyone loves him. He's cool. He has a lot of knowledge about that stuff, so I showed him one of the pictures. I was like, what is this machine? And he told me it was one of the old printers that they used to use back in the 70s, which baffled me. It baffled my mind.
What I find interesting, too, about looking through all of this is there's so much there about the history of where we are today. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the things that I remember very clearly was a newspaper ad from, I want to say, the 80s, introducing our PTA program.
Really?
These are the types of things that ultimately we hope to distribute these photos, not only to marketing and whomever else in administration might want to use them, but I would also want to distribute these to the individual programs. For instance, when I saw these mass media photos, Noah, I mean, this was like a key that unlocked so much mystery to all of this. Because Dylan Bowman, in his time here a few years back, he did a article called Radio Revisited. Okay. And it was actually got published in the Pennsylvania News Media annual publication, which was a high honor.
Oh, wow.
And it was all about, he had reached out to these individuals who were alumni from here, and because we literally didn't know anything about this radio station.
The one that used to be here.
Correct. And so Dylan Bowman had a really cool series that he did in his last couple of terms here, and one of the articles was called History Preserved Part 2, the Media Plus Club and Central Penn's Lost Radio Station, a great article that really showed us about these stations, and he went and reached out to numerous people. I introduced him to several people, including Anne-Marie Knorr.
Who's that?
All alumni. There were several alumni members. Dean Regal, I got to meet him. It was a pleasure to get to know these folks. And then, of course, we invited them all to the Hall of Fame.
They were all there.
Yes. And so that was really, really cool that we got to learn about the station. But then, it was then when we found these photos that the whole time Dylan had been searching for, and then we found these photos, and it really just meant so much to us as a department. So my whole point here, Noah, was I think that the individual members of these departments are really going to appreciate that. But again, as I went through, that newspaper ad promoting our new PTA program was one. I mean, this program is 40 years later still the preeminent PTA program in our region. And so I think that if the individual program directors would be interested in these things, I think that there's a lot that they could do with them and maybe help them understand the history of Central Penn College, especially in their area.
I think I want to draw this back to, it's not just about Central Penn College. Like, these photos not only show us the history of our school, our programs, the people that went there, they kind of show us almost the history of humanity. We get a glimpse into how life went on during these time periods, dating back to almost the 60s, some photos being from 50s, not really. The earliest I'm going to go back is 60s from photograph-wise.
Again, I'm assuming that most of these are 1970 and later. Not to say that there can't or isn't other ones or aren't other ones, but I would imagine most of those are going to be within the last 50 years.
But there are some old ones. There are some really, really old ones. And it really is cool to see and have a look and lens into how life was like back then, but also how everyone functioned, how they dressed. And you can kind of see their personalities and attitudes just from their faces. And some people didn't look very happy. Some people really did look really happy. And also, it makes me think that the fact that we have this right now, why aren't we right now? Like, I feel like our current era of people, we don't take photographs enough to commemorate or to digitize or to restore or preserve our history, because years from now, no one's going to know what happened in 2023 in Central Penn College if no one takes photos of these things.
Well, we'll hope they stand the test of time from every time you get a new phone, losing the photos that you've had.
Yeah.
Well, Noah, I just, first of all, I appreciate everything that you've done. You've done such a great job, and it's not like you were always doing this during your work study. We try to get you on podcasts and we try to get you to do other things, because I know that it can be, I don't want to say, let's just say it can be repetitive.
It's tedious, for sure.
But I just want you to understand the value that this has with an institution that was founded in 1881. Of course, a few years back, we just celebrated 140th, and next year will be 145.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty incredible that if, at a minimum, that you are able to, in some way, preserve the history of the last almost 50 years here, or 50 plus years here in Summerdale. So I appreciate that. Again, now that we are sort of reaching the finish line, we decided to do a campus presentation.
Yes.
And that presentation, again, is going to be, of course, that event is going to be on Wednesday, June 11th from 12 to 1 p.m. in ETIC 200, called Frames of the Past, Summerdale Campus History Project with Noah Lopez. So, Noah, again, now that this project is coming to a close, at least this iteration of it, who knows what the future could bring. There's, I'm sure, plenty of other things that could be digitized.
Yeah, sure.
But at least at this point, I think that we have managed to preserve a significant amount of the history of our institution. As you approach this project, how are you going to make sense of all this? How are you going to create this narrative that it would be required in a presentation like this?
So the idea I just conjured on the spot when you asked me this question for the narrative of the project is I kind of want to tell a story with it. I want to show everyone on the campus, and visitors are welcome, please come. Little plug there. But just how Central Penn has evolved over time and how us as humanity has evolved over time. Because I don't want this to just be about the college. History is history, no matter where it is. History is the story of the past. And I want this narrative to be about how we've grown and how our technologies have grown, along with the programs that we teach and how we learn as a people.
So we'll come right back to this, but I want to draw a parallel here. Noah, you are currently working on a major project with East Pennsboro Historical Society.
Yes.
Not to say that maybe there isn't and can't be some overlap in the future, but what you're doing for them is not necessarily what you're doing for this Frames of the Past. However, does your experience with this project here at Central Penn give you a new appreciation for some of the items and artifacts that you're working with through the East Penn Historical Society?
Well, certainly, yes. I've come in contact firsthand with history. I've touched it. I've interacted with it. And as I've, digitized all these projects, all these items, you kind of draw a connection to history and you kind of want to know more. And with my work at the Historical Society of East Pennsboro or the East Pennsboro History Society, whichever name you want, it's motivated me to really put passion into what I'm doing, because at the end of the day, if this stuff isn't protected, preserved, it will wither away into the past. I mean, we don't fully know what happened before 1800s perfectly accurately. I mean, we can make assumptions about dinosaurs and things like that, but we don't know what the Earth looked like. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that what I'm doing is going to preserve a time period not only for us now, but for our future generations. And hopefully the 2000s will be remembered just as well as the 80s were. Everyone loves the 80s, you know?
You know, Noah, one thing I neglected to mention, which I do think has significant salience, as Professor Olimpi would say, you're from here.
I am.
You went to East Penn High School.
But I am from Harrisburg first, and then I moved
I
here,
understand, but in fairness, I was born in Harrisburg myself, but often if somebody asks me where I'm from, I'll say Carlisle,
Oh, right.
you know, because I spent much of my youth there. But at a minimum, you went to East Penn High School, you come to Central Penn, you get to help preserve the history of your college, then you take another step, and now you're helping to preserve, or if nothing else, amplify the history of where you went to high school. Does that... Like, how does all of this sit
wow.
with you?
I didn't really think about that. You didn't. You just pointed a light on there. I didn't. Wow. Okay. Yeah, because a lot of the things we have at the Historical Society of East Pennsboro are East Pennsboro High School history. We have yearbooks dating back to, I think, the 30s.
Wow.
I don't want to say it, but I think the 30s. I know at least we have 40s because I've seen 44 yearbooks, and yearbooks looked really weird back then. We're not going to lie.
Technology has come a long way in 80 years.
But
Noah.
pictures of people back then are really creepy.
Photography has
Yes,
come a long
I know,
way
I
in
know.
80 years.
Well, it's really cool to see that, and really does make an impact on me because some people, like the people I talk to at the History Society, they say they went to East Pennsboro High School as well, and they had some of the professors, or know some of not professors but teachers I had. They're like, "Do you know this one art teacher? I had them when I went to school there," and that's like, wow, what a small world.
Again, I want you to go in whatever direction you want, but I do think that that's a really interesting hook.
It is.
I am from here. I went to East Penn High School. My family lives in this area. I'm attending school here, and I'm working for the Historical Society. So I, in a sense, am helping to not only preserve history of the college, but history of where I'm from. And I hope, in a sense, that gives you a bit more of a connection to this, because the reason that I connected you with the East Penn Historical Society, Noah, you're going to be good at anything you do.
Hey.
But I knew that you went to East Penn. I knew that you're from this area, and you had this experience with Central Penn Historical Project. So I hope that when you kick off your presentation, and spoiler alert to anyone listening, I hope that you lead with that, because I think that just shows why this is important to you and builds your credibility as far as a historical authority on this area. I don't know if you look at yourself that way, but if you think about it, you're helping preserve college history, which in a sense is East Penn history.
Okay.
And then you're working with the Historical Society, which is again maintaining, preserving, and amplifying the history of this area of which you're from. I think that that's just spectacular.
I didn't even think about it that way. But,
Well, hey, I come up with some good stuff every once in a while.
Hey, what is going on? But yeah, thank you for that. I really do think my work, I'm hoping that my work has an impact. I mean,
Of course it does.
My only ever dream is to leave this world impacting as many people as I can. So
You have a good
Yeah.
start. Let's just
Yeah.
say that. Well, Noah, I can't thank you enough for your diligence and dedication to this project. This is not a project that is for everyone. It's as you mentioned, can be tedious.
Very.
And in a sense, I'm sure at the beginning you're like, why am I doing this? What is the end game
in
here?
the beginning, I just saw it as busy work, extra money, and then over time, I saw the real value of it, because when you really take a moment to think about what you're doing when it comes to history, you're preserving, people's legacy.
It's almost like, in a sense, sometimes when I talk to students about college, when you look at the individual classes and even down to the individual assignments, you might think that some of that is busy work.
Yes, but you're learning, so...
But when you look back and reflect back, whether it's by a term or by a year or by graduation, you start to understand that the very small things that you were doing add up to something special.
May I actually add to that? I want to say that my graphic design class, probably one of the best classes I've ever had here.
I appreciate that.
Gave me without that class, I wouldn't have been able to construct a better logo, letterhead, and help the History Society with their social media and things. Like, their letterhead was literally a picture of a house. It wasn't even a letterhead. It was a picture of a house in the corner. Not bashing you guys. I love you guys, okay? But
Well, that's why they brought you in.
I used my skills I learned from that class, which are fantastic. I love the class. Canva is really, really, really good for a free platform. And I created a new logo, which was sleek, it was simple, and it transferred the message that they were a History Society. But without that class, without that busy work, getting everything done in such a small time period, which taught me how to work under pressure, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So
I appreciate
Yeah.
that, Noah, very much. But Noah, in the end, and again, maybe it's not the end. Maybe after this term's all said and done, we go back to the drawing board and we try to see what else we have going on. But in the end, I want you to understand how greatly, not only I personally appreciate what you're doing, but future generations of Central Penn Knights, and even past generations of Central Penn Knights, will appreciate what you've done. And again, I also hope that we can share this with our marketing team. I would actually like to pitch a Pendulum article about this.
Oh, really?
I think there's a lot that we can do with this, Noah. And I just, you very easily in the first term or two could have been like, I'm this is not for me, but you never did. And now that it's coming to a conclusion or some sense of a conclusion, I think now you can start to see the value that this is going to have in different ways that we can distribute this historical information that's going to have a lasting effect.
Yes. Well, I wasn't going to give up because that's not the Lopez
I
way,
know.
okay? A true man never gives up on something he sees to succeed in.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that very much. Well, Noah, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. Of course, everyone, please save the date for Wednesday, June 11th from 12 to 1 p.m. in E-Tech 200 as Noah presents Frames of the Past, Summerdale Campus History Project. We will all be there with bells on, and I will very, very much look forward to joining you there.
Everyone, please be there. It's at the Central Penn College. If you need directions, look up Central Penn College on Google Maps. You'll be able to find it. All right?
And Noah, again, you are more than welcome to invite anyone you would like to join us. All are welcome, and even the folks from the East Pennsboro Historical
I'll
Society.
definitely
I
invite them,
down.
of course.
All right, well, hey, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. I want to thank news correspondent Noah Lopez for joining us today to talk about his upcoming presentation. So, Noah, as always, it's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to have you on my podcast.
Well, you're welcome. Anytime you have a podcast, I'll be on.
All right.
All right, but thank you again to Noah. Keep an eye out for June 11th from 12 to 1 E-Tech 200. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. For Noah Lopez, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time.